Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending our webinar on human trafficking and Catholic social teaching. My name is Christine Commerce. I'm the program director for the Alliance to End Human Trafficking. We are a survivor-informed organization that focuses on providing educational resources, giving presentations, raising awareness, and engaging in advocacy across the nation. We also support survivors of human trafficking in healing and thriving through financial support of our member houses and providing educational scholarships. Today, our focus is on Catholic social teaching, and the purpose of our webinar is to educate participants so they will leave with actionable ways that they can help identify and prevent various forms of human trafficking in our communities. Our webinars are free, but donations are always appreciated. And you can donate and find more information about our organization and this issue at alliancetoendhumantrafficking.org. Please note that this webinar will be recorded and shared. It will also be posted on our YouTube channel, where you can find many of our past webinars on various other topics surrounding human trafficking. I noticed in our follow-up survey after the last webinar, there were some comments on how to recognize the signs of human trafficking and different topics that we have covered in the past. So I definitely encourage you to go to our YouTube channel and check out some of our other webinars that you can get a lot more information about this atrocity. So with that said, please join me in welcoming our guests. I would first like to introduce Sister Marlene Weisenbeck, FSPA. She, in 2019, was invited to public service as a participant in the White House Advisory Council for faith-based and neighborhood partnerships, along with 15 to 20 other faith and nonprofit leaders who were requested to study the topic of human trafficking. It was there that she became more acquainted with this issue and led her to a local, national, and international involvements in eradicating this affront to human dignity. Her involvement includes serving as a member of the White House Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, participation in the Vatican's Pontifical Academy for Sciences and Social Sciences Conference, a board member of U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking, which was what we were formerly known as, and a convener of the La Crosse Task Force to eradicate modern slavery, as well as a member of the Wisconsin Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force. Next, we have Joe Evans, who is the coordinator of the Villanova University Peace Building Network through the Center for Peace and Justice Education and the Villanova representative in partnership with the Alliance to End Human Trafficking. He is the research fellow at the Mother Teresa Institute in Washington, D.C. His research focuses on peace building, Catholic social thought, Marian devotion, and interreligious relations. He is a retired lieutenant colonel of the U.S. Army and holds a PhD in theology and religious studies and a master's of theological studies from Villanova University, an MA in world politics from the Catholic University of America, MS in aerospace engineering from the University of Alabama, MSc in conflict studies from the University of Balochistan, Pakistan, and a BS in mechanical engineering from Lehigh University. I don't even know how you get all those degrees, but I'm sorry, that's just a little bit amazing. And then last but not least, we have Katie Bowler-Goswish, who is the executive director of the Alliance, where she began leading the organization's mission against trafficking and exploitation in May of 2022. With a career spanning over 20 years in the nonprofit sector, Katie is deeply committed to serving vulnerable populations, emphasizing advocacy, community engagement, and access to resources. Her experience, including executive leadership roles at Living at Home Network and WeCab, showcases her dedication to impactful services. Katie holds her graduate and undergraduate degrees in both history and theology, underlining her work's foundation in faith and principles of justice and dignity. And at the Alliance, she uses her expertise to further education advocacy and survivor support, striving for a world eradicated of human trafficking. So thank you. Please join me with a warm welcome, and we will start off with Sister Marlene.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this invitation to be part of this very important discussion about Catholic social teaching and its relationship to uh, human trafficking. So my role today is to talk with you about the biblical foundations of Catholic social teaching. I'll go right into the concept of Goel, which comes from the Hebrew word gal'el, to deliver, to redeem. And aside from its common usage, it is frequently employed in connection with Hebrew law, where it is a technical term applied to a person who, as the nearest relative of another, is placed under certain obligations to that person. The term gal'el, is taken from land redemption law. So if land were sold by a person, it could be brought back to keep land in the family, for example. Or the term could also be used as a metaphor for God's grace, which means a way of regaining blessing in the sense of covenant. So the word itself, goel, is derived, as we said, from the Hebrew word, which means redeemer, or kinsman, redeemer, or blood brother. It's a concept deeply rooted in the social and legal customs of ancient Israel. The role of the Goel was multifaceted, encompassing a lot of responsibilities related to family, property, and justice. Basically, the Goel could take up any duty which could not be performed by oneself. It had to be taken up by the next of kin. Essentially, let's think of the Goel as the protector of the community. And isn't this what we try to be when we try to implement Catholic social teachings? Think of blood as the primal energy of life, or the dynamic force which sustains people together as a community, which sustains them to the land or to the responsibility of continuing the future of a tribe and its offspring. The figure of Goel was to fulfill the vital task of preserving the bonds of tribal blood and protecting the community. Primary is that of protecting, which was expressed in various ways, such as being a ransomer to bring back anyone who might have been taken into slavery, or a redeemer to bring back any land that was lost, or the blood brother concept of marrying one's brother's widow. We know that from the very sensitive story of Ruth in the Old Testament. But what I'd like to do is spend just a bit of time considering the prominent goels of our biblical tradition: Moses, Joseph, and Jesus. We all know that the whole prophetic tradition is broader than this, and it would take a whole semester's course or two or three to consider that full indication of prophetic tradition. Let's take a look at Moses. He certainly was an architect of the tradition of justice in the Bible as we know it. We could say that he was a shaper of the world in the social sphere, the public sphere. He was a central figure of the Old Testament and often associated with the concept of justice. He served as a mediator between God and the Israelites and as a lawgiver who established a legal framework for the nation of Israel. His role was to build and to make something different from people. His knowledge and his experience of God was the basis for his purpose or mission. His legacy as a proponent of justice is evident in his final speeches recorded in the book of Deuteronomy, where he reiterated the importance of obedience to God's laws and the pursuit of justice. For example, he said, "Justice and only justice you shall pursue, that you may live and possess the land of the Lord that your God is giving you." Joseph. Why do we choose Joseph? We know that he was favored by his father Jacob, who gave him that beautiful coat of many colors. And we also know from more contemporary behavioral studies that when a child is singled out for special treatment in a family, sometimes the other children feel marginalized. And then what happens? Conflicts intensify. And in this case, Joseph, this dynamic peaked when his brothers saw an opportunity to get rid of him and to profit from the transaction of getting rid of him. Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery because they were jealous, because they were angry, and this opportunism drove them to remove him from the family and make a profit in the process. Isn't this what we think about or know about as we experience the many cases of human trafficking that we may have encountered? Yet, woven throughout that whole story of Joseph is the idea of divine providence, that sometimes even wicked actions cannot necessarily thwart a higher plan that God has for us, and we are led to future deliverance and reconciliation. The themes in Joseph's story about forgiveness and reconciliation, restoration, all of these themes underscore the belief that God's justice, sometimes, though it is delayed, is ultimately fulfilled in God's perfect timing. And finally, the prophet Jesus. The ultimate fulfillment is found in the person and the work of Jesus in the scriptures that we read about in the New Testament. Themes of righteousness, fairness, and moral character and order that have been established by God. Jesus is the embodiment of divine justice. His life and teachings reflect God's standard of justice. We know the statement of Jesus, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them." We are called to reflect Christ's justice in our lives. And as recipients of this grace, all believers are called to pursue justice, love, mercy, and walk humbly with God. So, what does the way of Moses, Joseph, and Jesus have to do with social transformation? Ebed, Yahweh, is also a human Hebrew term that means servant or servant of Yahweh. It has the general meaning of serving others, being an assistant, or being even a slave to others in their misery. As well, it has a theological use with regard to the believer who devotes oneself to serve and honor and worship God. In the book of Isaiah, the term describes the ideal servant of God. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus gives us a ministry manifesto. Jesus as Goel for humanity. Paul's ministry manifesto is about the call of gospel justice. And we hear many calls to this ministry in our contemporary experience of our leaders in the church. Of course, Goel, the combination of contemplation and action, is like a source and stream of our being. And this, I'm going to end with this slide, it is one depiction of the model of solidarity actions that we can take in terms of social justice. And we know it as a model of theological reflection, where we begin with our experience, and we've referenced experience or the experience of others, looking at it, seeing what we can see, asking ourselves what we can do to share the experience or understand the experience of the other, and then somehow either exposing ourselves to that experience and then uh, making a judgment about what we can do. Once we have that analysis and judgment, then we decide to act in some way after we have listened to the people that have been most directly affected. So, tracing this arc of human and moral consciousness, we as human beings become the slow bending toward justice that is unfolded in the history of Israel. This is where we learned about it, where we have learned to care for others, to give hope, and to trust that God, through us, will continue to be the Goel for all the suffering of the world. And so that will be the end of my contribution as such, at least my segment of it. And I'm here to participate in the questions and comments as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sister Marlene. Now, Dr. Joe Evans is going to talk a little bit more about the magisterial sort of arc of development of Catholic social teaching.
Thank you, Katie. So what I'm going to talk about is human dignity in Catholic social teaching and its relation to human trafficking. So I'll start with the question of what is, let's see if I can get this to work. There we go. All right, so while there is no one definition of human dignity in Catholic social teaching, the church has consistently related dignity to being created in the image of God, the intrinsic worth of the person in relation to love. That's God's love for us, our love for God and ourselves, and our love for others. The concept, fully developed through papal teaching, is summarized in a document from the Dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith, Dignitas Infinita, which states every human person possesses an infinite dignity, inalienably grounded in his or her very being, which prevails in and beyond every circumstance, state, or situation the person may ever encounter. This principle, human dignity, which is fully recognizable even by reason alone, underlies the primacy of the human person and the protection of human rights. Now, the two sources that the church uses for talking about human dignity in its Catholic social teaching are scriptural and human rights. Biblical revelation teaches that all human beings possess inherent dignity, excuse me, because they are created in the image and likeness of God, and that comes from Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. The image does not define the soul or its intellectual abilities, but one's dignity. In their relationship of equality and mutual love, both man and woman represent God in the world and are called to cherish and nurture the world. The second source for how the church speaks of dignity, especially over the past 60 years, is in connection with human rights. The dignity and unique value of every person in the world was reaffirmed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights issued by the UN General Assembly in 1948. So Catholic social teaching refers to different types of human dignity. And I don't want you to get overwhelmed by the titles or the terms for these different types, but I think it's helpful to understand. So they define or they describe ontological or intrinsic dignity, moral dignity, social dignity, existential dignity, and more recently, transcendent dignity. So the most important is the ontological dignity that belongs to the person simply because he or she exists and is willed, created, and loved by God. It is permanent, enduring, always valid. Moral dignity refers to how people exercise their freedom, which can be problematic when people act against the gospel's law of love, committing acts of evil against others. This distinction can help us discern between the moral dignity that can be lost and the ontological dignity that can never be lost. Social dignity refers to the quality of a person's living conditions. So extreme poverty may be considered undignified, not in a judgment on the individuals, but on the situation, but that the situation contradicts their inalienable dignity. Existential dignity is related to how some people may appear to lack nothing, but they struggle to live with peace, joy, and hope. Or hardships may drive people to experience their life as undignified. A fifth and more recent descriptive term, transcendent dignity, tends to connect all these different types, making dignity relational and connected again to human rights. Every person possesses an intrinsic dignity as an irrevocable gift. The choice to express that dignity and manifest it fully depends on their personal freedom and responsibility. People must realize their own dignity as well as see it in others, both the persecuted and the persecutors. For the persecutor, the trafficker who has committed grave acts to rob another of their dignity, we still must see the image of God in them. Catholic social teaching approaches this in three ways: the promotion of human dignity, defending human dignity, and the struggle for human dignity. So what does it mean to promote human dignity? The church promotes and proclaims the equal dignity of all people, regardless of their living conditions or qualities. When the dignity of the human person is respected and his or her rights recognized and guaranteed, the individual flourishes in a way that furthers the common good. The second common theme that arises within Catholic social teaching is to safeguard, defend, or protect human dignity. Although dignity is intrinsic, we must defend the social, moral, and existential dignity for ourselves and others. In addition to human rights and the scriptural basis of dignity, Catholic social teaching approaches the safeguarding of human dignity through perspectives of faith and justice. Now, before we move to the struggle for human dignity, what are those threats that would require defense or protection of dignity? These are anything that is opposed to life or offenses against life. So human trafficking is specifically mentioned as a threat to human dignity in Catholic teaching, especially in papal encyclicals and in the document from the Dicastery of the Doctrine of Faith that I mentioned earlier. But many of the other threats are related. For example, poverty, arbitrary imprisonment, deportation, slavery, prostitution, exploitation, eroticism, violence, as well as the struggles of migrants, sexual abuse, violence, and discrimination against women, just to name a few. So why is there a struggle? The threats to human dignity are primarily related to injustice or a lack of moral dignity. These include the same threats, but more so the systems that cause them, such as economic systems, social factors, political oppression or wars, etc. These are often caused by moral shortcomings or a failure to be responsible through action or with respect to our own freedoms. And those struggling for human dignity. Catholic social teaching identifies three types of people affected by the struggle for human dignity: those who are oppressed or marginalized or systems, those who struggle with a lack of responsibility or their own poor decisions, and those who society or others struggle to see their dignity. For the marginalized or oppressed, CST emphasizes the need to protect their dignity, acknowledge their struggles, and to identify the contributing factors. The second set of people who struggle are those who fall short in moral dignity, hindering their social and existential dignity. And the third category may be the most challenging, and that's those whose society loses sight of their intrinsic dignity, such as the traffickers who enslave or exploit others. Nevertheless, ontological dignity cannot be lost. And because we must love our enemies, it cannot be dismissed. The struggle for dignity has three sides: for others to see their ontological dignity, for the person to struggle for the moral, social, and existential dignity, and for society to assist in that struggle for the person to reclaim these other forms of dignity. It's not a stretch to explain why human trafficking should be connected to dignity. Pope Francis denounced it in emphatic terms. He says, "I reaffirm here that the trade in people is a vile activity, a disgrace to our societies that claim to be civilized. Exploiters and clients at all levels should make a serious examination of conscience, both in the first person and before God." And he bases this on a respect for fundamental rights. The struggle for human dignity in relation to human trafficking can be looked at in three different ways. First, with regard to the victims of trafficking, those who are bought, sold, exploited, used, treated as objects, suffering trauma and injury. The issue is not their moral dignity, but their struggle for social and existential dignity. Alternatively, there's the issue of the traffickers themselves. Here we find people who obviously fail to recognize the inherent dignity of other human beings, but also struggle with their own moral dignity and social dignity. And then finally, the third group. And this includes those who contribute or enable trafficking by turning a blind eye or partaking in services provided by trafficked people. In this case, we again have a struggle for moral dignity and existential dignity, as they struggle to find peace and joy with the gifts that God has given them, and instead turn seeking sexual pleasure from prostitutes or pornography, of which 75% or more involve trafficking victims. One does not even need to be a consumer of prostitution or pornography to enable trafficking, but even a failure to examine the supply chains of many of the material goods, food, or other products that we use. It's likely that we are all guilty to some extent, which means that we must continue to struggle for our own moral, social, and existential dignity. It's our responsibility in our communities, dioceses, and as a universal church. The dignity of the human person in the human community and the profound meaning of human activity is the foundation for Catholic social teaching. The Church's mission involves defending and promoting the dignity and fundamental rights of the human person. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you so much, Sister Marlene. Now I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Katie.
Great. Thank you, Joe and Sister Marlene, for your insight into the scriptural and magisterial foundations of Catholic social teaching. While I'm going to focus on two of the themes, I want to quickly mention a few things about the other five. So Joe obviously covered the dignity of the human person very thoroughly. I just want to mention one other aspect, that being made in the image and likeness of God is not just a call to the rights of the human person, but also that responsibility. We're responsible to each other and for each other. We're in relationship. It's, we have our model of the Trinity as the ultimate relationship of mutuality, where there's room for the individual, room for the community, and that is where we sort of base our dignity, in that relationship, in that call to understand that we are made in the image and likeness of God, and the other is made in the image and likeness of God as well. So the other 6 themes flow from the first theme, and they are, as listed right there, call to family, community, and participation, rights and responsibility, the option for the poor and vulnerable, dignity of work and the rights of workers, solidarity, and care for creation. For the purpose of this webinar and in the interest of time, I'm going to focus on the option for the poor and vulnerable as well as solidarity. So the option for the poor and vulnerable. I first learned about this theme of Catholic social teaching when I was a teenager. And with my teenage brain, I thought this was very unfair. Why does Jesus love someone more than me? But I grew up and I studied theology and learned that my earlier thought was obviously missing the aim of this theme. The idea behind the option for the poor and vulnerable is that it is a mark of ourself, our society, our person, to care for the most marginalized, for those who are most vulnerable. In relationship to human trafficking, we know that traffickers prey on vulnerability. A few examples of this include people who are forced to migrate, those who cannot make a living due to natural disaster or conflict, those who face racial discrimination, those who face poverty, children in foster care, individuals with negative social determinants like suffering abuse as children or domestic violence. A mark of a faithful society is its work toward justice and care for those who have been harmed by people and systems who don't just abuse individuals, but also abuse power. The body of Christ, the church, is called to care for those who are not cared for and for those who cannot care for themselves. We are called to recognize our own humanity reflected in the eyes of another and to cherish and uplift it. Solidarity is the second theme that I wanted to talk about. We are all members of the human family. As I talked about with the Trinitarian model, we are in relationship with each other and responsible for and to the other. This responsibility and care for each other demands the work for peace and justice. We are charged to never turn a blind eye to the suffering of our brothers and sisters. As Joe mentioned, Pope Francis has been particularly prolific in his care for trafficking survivors and his encouragement of those who work to end human trafficking. He called human trafficking a wound on the body of Christ and a global scourge. In his final autobiography, Hope, Pope Francis refers frequently to the problem of indifference, meaning that there are many people in this world who see something, know that there's something wrong, but don't act. And one of the things that I talk about most frequently is that if you do see something and you get that feeling in you, that there is something wrong, that there's something off, the best thing you can do is act to help another person. At worst, if you're wrong, you might give someone a bad day, but at best, you might be helping to save someone's life. So I always err on the side of action. And I think Pope Francis very much hit the nail on the head when he talked about the difficulty of indifference and how that has sort of broken up our human family. People just don't want to get involved. And we really are called by solidarity to do that, to get involved, to work for peace and justice. In another address, Pope Francis stated quite plainly, if we close our eyes and ears, if we do nothing, we will be guilty of complicity. I don't know if there's much more, way to really come out and say it, but we are complicit. And from the goods that we purchase, Joe mentioned participation in pornography, prostitution. I think in many ways, all of us are guilty and complicit in some way. And so to really work toward that movement where we are acting on behalf of our brothers and sisters, and that really will improve our community, our church, and ourselves. And finally, I am going to end with a quote from the Pastoral Constitution from the Second Vatican Council on the Church in the Modern World. Whatever insults human dignity, such as subhuman living conditions, arbitrary imprisonment, deportation, slavery, prostitution, the selling of women and children and men, as well as disgraceful working conditions, where humans are treated as mere tools for profit rather than as free and responsible persons. All these things and others of their like are infamies indeed. They poison human society, but they do more harm to those who practice them than those who suffer from the injury. They are a supreme dishonor to the Creator. So thank you. And I think, Christine, we're going to move into Q&A.
Yes, thank you so much, Katie. Really appreciate all your insights. And go ahead and remove your pin. And then we're going to move into our Q&A portion. So while I'm asking our panelists some questions from our end, please feel free to put some of your questions in the Q&A. We do not have the option to do a live Q&A session, so you can just go ahead and type in your questions. I see that we already have some, so please take a few minutes to do so. And while you are doing that, I'm going to go ahead and pose a few questions to our panelists, and we'll go from there. So feel free to speak up, whoever would like to address any of the questions. My first question, something I feel personally strongly about, is how we can do better as Catholics with our purchasing choices, and even how not only individuals, but parishes as well. So I'm going to give a couple examples, and nothing like good old Catholic guilt. But so we have coffee, we have like coffee and donuts after church every Sunday in a lot of our parishes, or most of our parishes, and to me, that's just one example of how we can think about protecting the dignity of the worker. Are we looking at direct trade coffee or fair trade coffee, where people are paid fair wages for their work so they can afford to send their kids to school? Or we as good Catholics participate in Lent, and we have these amazing fish fries, and give up fish, or I mean meat on Fridays, and eat seafood. But are we looking at where our seafood is sourced? Are we looking at our purchasing choices? And I apologize, I do not have the number of Catholics or parishes across the United States. I don't know if any of you go to know that. But think about, if everyone did their part, how much of a great impression we can have. And I know the diocese over in Australia, and the name is slipping me now, but they do a tremendous job with this. And so my question to the panelists is, what can we do? What can parishes do to be better, I guess, proponents of Catholic social teaching, where we're not just talking about it, but we're actually putting our actions where our words are? That was a long-winded question, I know.
So I think the first thing that parishes and diocesan offices across the country and the world can do is actually talk about it and educate people on what Catholic social teaching is, and that it's not just a list of themes, but it's a call to action. And then I think from there, you really start to focus on, coffee and donuts. Are we using fair trade coffee? My last parish that I belonged to before I moved, they sold fair trade coffee, they sold fair trade chocolate. They really tried to make purchases that were, based in justice.
What
Thank
you've
you.
done, I think, Christine, is already to begin to raise awareness about the kind of time it takes to even become aware of fair trade coffee, and or any other source of food, seafood or whatever it is. And so I also emphasize those conversations. And if our parishes have any kind of an investment portfolio, then decide to divest from a company that does not, or to buy from a company that does not promote for fair trade coffee. Even invest in that company so that they can do better than what they're already doing.
Thank you. And I just want to throw out there one more time that we have a number of webinars on our YouTube channel. So if you're kind of new to this issue and you're wondering what's fair trade, what is she talking about with the seafood industry and so forth, we have a number of webinars, Slavery in Our Tomatoes, Freedom for Fishermen webinars, where you can learn more about this issue, and how human trafficking affects laborers around the world. Joe, is there anything you'd like to add?
Joe, you're muted.
I would go back to what Katie stressed at the end, and all the different the different examples that you gave when you spoke, but it's responsibility. Personal responsibility is part of that aspect, right? And there's every different aspect, whether it's awareness or actions within our diocese, all those different levels.
Thank you. I see Nancy Brown, you've raised your hand. I don't mean to call you out, but please put your questions in the Q&A. We won't be doing any live questions. But before we get to our questions from our audience, I'd like to ask each of you what you have done personally to be in solidarity with people to address the issue of human dignity in relation to human trafficking. Or any of the Catholic social
I'll go
teaching aspects. Okay, Kate.
Way to call us out. Well, personally, I run a national anti-trafficking organization. So I'm going to go with that. That's my first one. Where, when we do things, I try to make sure that we're doing things responsibly. Where are our t-shirts being printed? Where are our bags being printed? Are we using things that are ecologically sound? I bought plant-based pop sockets. And when we go places, are we even the candy that we hand out at tables when we exhibit at someplace, I buy the little Tony's Chocolanelli coins, which are awfully good. I think, again, it's about awareness and personal responsibility and not just saying, oh, yes, I'm against human trafficking, because, not many people are going to say they're for it. But, what are you doing in your life? If you see something, are you doing something about it? And I think that is the biggest thing, just to own that responsibility.
Thank you. Sister Marlene, would you like to go next?
Well, what I've done personally about as a response or a solidarity action was I spent a lot of time giving presentations about human trafficking, and I would usually open up my presentation by saying, trafficking is about the sale of human flesh, whether it is in work or buying sex or looking at pornography. And I often found that really caught people's attention, the sale of human flesh. As a means, it's kind of a morbid term, a very shocking term, and maybe it's an approach that I have in trying to help raise awareness. But it brings people, I think, to some kind of consciousness of what modern slavery can be all about. And another thing that I did, which is different than that, was I think I've been influential with my own religious community in making a legacy gift to the Alliance to End Human Trafficking. And I would encourage parishes or dioceses or other religious institutes too, or institutions of higher education or healthcare to make a gift, some kind of a legacy gift to organizations that are in there and on the ground doing that very difficult work that sometimes the rest of us do not have the opportunity to do on a larger scale.
Thank you, Sister Marlene, and thank you so much for all your support. And Daryl?
You're welcome.
Sure. So as a representative at a university and in a research institute, I have less of a chance to be directly involved as I was before, especially as a military officer. But I think it's the same types of things. As a military officer, I work to support sometimes directly in anti-human trafficking operations, but also to support those organizations that were doing it and bring them together and make the connections. And now at the university and through the other diocese and parish and whatnot, it's the same things though, right? Raising awareness, supporting those organizations, making the connections between those and the resources that are available and making sure everybody's aware of what they can be.
Thank you. And then I'd like to also throw out some biblical context. I know Sister Marlene mentioned we got Moses and we had Joseph and Jesus. And I always like to give the example too of David and Goliath, right? Because David took 5 stones to defeat Goliath, and human trafficking and labor trafficking it's such a huge issue. And sometimes we may feel like David tackling this issue, but I always like to encourage everyone just to take 5 products and change the way you purchase those products. And I do feel like we all have an individual responsibility, whether you're in charge of an individual parish or even your own purchasing choices. And I can see how people sometimes are complicit and they will just not want to be bothered. And I've seen this even with friends, where I've told them, like, there's signs of human trafficking here. You need to call about this massage parlor, but they don't want to be bothered, or they don't want to take that next step. Maybe they're going to be wrong. And so I just encourage everyone just to step out of sight of their comfort zones and, ask about the seafood when you're ordering in a restaurant, or, make that call to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which we can put in the chat, but it's 888-3737, 888 is the easy way to remember it. For me personally, I've had family members say, like, why do you continue to do this work? It's so hard. It's got to be hard on you and all this. And I'm like, I can't unknow what I know, so it's the first step is educating yourself. And once you educate yourself, then you have to take the next step on how you can take action. But if we don't educate ourselves and we don't understand what are the signs to look for, Sister Marlene mentioned the sale of human flesh, and organ trafficking is another whole issue related to human trafficking. And there's so many different facets. But that's where we need to be educated about this issue and learn what we can do. So I'm going to go ahead and go to our first question from Jeff Mason, who asked, how might gospel, nonviolence, and agape be expressed to counter the malevolence of human trafficking in society today? Would anyone like to tackle that one as best as they can?
Question again to myself.
You repeat the question. It is a
Sure.
really
How
substantial
might
one.
gospel, nonviolence, and agape be expressed to counter the malevolence of human trafficking in society today? And if it's something you need more clarification, we can ask for that as well.
Well, I'm thinking in response to that question about a statement that a panelist from, I believe, the Martin Luther King Center made last week at the LCWR conference. And obviously much of the work that the Carter, either the nonviolence, and at the end, I mean, you could see it even in their demeanor of loving kindness. And one of the last sentences he said is, our challenge to mobilize love when hate is strategic. I think that's gospel nonviolence. We may not like what we see. We in the face of it. But I think the way we hold ourselves are all actions of nonviolence and agape that can help us mobilize love when hate is strategic.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think Joe alluded to this, and he mentioned, when we talk about human trafficking, it is such an evil evil thing, and we can definitely, demonize or call out the traffickers for the evil that they do. But at the same time, we have to also look at it from a perspective as a lot of times the traffickers experienced the same abuse that many women who were trafficked experienced. So what we have seen in society is that women who often are abused or neglected within their families tend to be end up being trafficking victims. Not always, but in a lot of cases. And then what we see with the traffickers is that the men will end up being the traffickers and the women will be the victims. So in some cases, we have to kind of understand that even the perpetrators, in one way or another, had been a victim themselves along the way. So our next question is, what are some of the unmet needs of the anti-trafficking community that someone with little time on his or her hands could help alleviate? In other words, how can an average layperson get involved in preventing human trafficking, right? I think that's a great question. We're all so busy, so many things to do. School's starting back up, our kids are going to school. What can we do as an individual about this issue?
Joe, did you want to go first? I can't tell if you're wanting to speak.
No, I will defer to you. And then if I think of anything, I'll.
Okay. Well, the first thing that I'm going to say is you can certainly become a member of the Alliance to End Human Trafficking and get involved in the work that way. That's a very easy thing to do, and you can join a working group and get involved in some of our various actions. But just a person on the ground who, with a little bit of know-how and can get various resources, if you're talking about, within your community, you can offer to go and talk about it somewhere. Go talk to your pastor, go talk to your parish council, get them involved in the process as well. Make sure they know that Catholic social teaching is a demand, a call to action. Talk about, the definition of human trafficking as someone being sold through force, fraud, or coercion. Very simply, you can do, you can send out 1 million action alerts through various organizations, including the Alliance, that will focus on legislation around the issues of human trafficking. You can make purchasing choices, instead of buying a bar of Hershey's chocolate, you could buy, Tony's Chocolanelli or Nestle. You can make sound choices in your purchasing. You can talk with your dollars. Sister Marlene alluded to shareholder advocacy. So if you are, holding millions of dollars, and you can make a point with your business or your organization or your individual funds, where you can engage with corporations who might be, like a tech organization that's using child labor to mine for cobalt. When you purchase technology, instead of getting the latest iPhone, get something that's refurbished, so that you're not creating a new purchase of a new product. So those are a few things really that I can think of.
Thank you so much, Katie. Yeah, I think there's some really big things you can do and some really little things that take very little time. Just even following us on social media, sharing some of our social media posts. If you sign up for our action alerts, it's a click of a button. It takes like 2 minutes to send some of our action alerts to your local legislators. So those are just some really simple ways. And of course, always giving a donation helps. The other thing, we offer presentations for free. If you have a presenter in your area, we can connect you with them. Otherwise, we can do them virtually on a plethora of these issues, whether it's labor trafficking and more about fair trade or sex trafficking or pornography, the demand side, all of that. We're happy to bring to your parish if you're interested in learning more. And that's another simple way that you can help spread this awareness. So our next question is from Nancy Brown. Regarding human trafficking, nothing will change until the buyer is prosecuted. How can the church community focus on the demand side to end this injustice to children and women? And I'd like to add that we should not forget about the men and boys, because they are also often part of that demand as well.
I'm gonna jump in because I've got my answer ready. So I think the key here is that we need to focus on prevention. Lots, as Christine sort of alluded to, much of these things are perpetuated over and over again in a cycle. So you have, intergenerational trauma that begets more trauma. So how are we working on those social determinants? How are we working on root causes of human trafficking? Yes. Should the person be prosecuted who's doing the trafficking? Absolutely. But we want to have a focus on restorative justice and not just incarceration. So the focus on restorative justice, the focus on sort of conquering other social ills that sort of lead to this cycle of trauma is really, I think, very important. Addressing the demand, I think, is incredibly both important and challenging, because everyone participates in that demand. I don't know anyone who hasn't purchased something that probably was in some way in the supply chain, there was human trafficking. So, I think we continue to educate ourselves, work on prevention, and then educate our communities, be it church, be it, your community education, your public school, whoever you want to educate. I think we need to engage all people across various groups.
Thank you, Katie. Marlene or Joe, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I've heard, I think all of us speak about the importance of relationships as the foundation of human dignity. And I think that all of us, though we have so much to attend to and to look at and to hear about, that sometimes our senses are, overindulged, over, uh, saturated in things that we see around us. But simply to listen and to hear a person. I remember the first time that someone came up to me and said, I am a survivor. And then she told me some of the surroundings, the background about her survivorship and having been trafficked. And I began to respond very differently to her in a relational way. Or learning about the 200 kids in your small town, like La Crosse, that might be homeless. And if you see a child on the street alone, what about the relationality of that child? Why is that child alone? So if you see something, do something. In other words, in a case like that, offer to help, call the police, contact the principal of the school, any of those kinds of things, I think is one way we can begin to make things change.
Thank you so much, Sister Marlene. And I think that's a great point, because I read a book recently on human trafficking, and to me, it always breaks my heart when I read about how these victims became victims in the first place. They could have been a runaway, right? And they're sitting there on the side of the street. Who is the one that usually shows them the kindness and buys them a meal? Unfortunately, it's the trafficker. How many hundreds of people walk past this little girl or this little boy by themselves, 12, 11, 13 years old, and do not take the time to engage with them in a conversation? Who engages with them? The trafficker. They're the ones who show them kindness, and that's where that grooming process begins. The other thing I wanted to add, because I know this was also mentioned, was pornography. What are our parishes doing to address pornography? I've been told it is one of the number one things that is heard in the confessional, and yet I feel like it's not being addressed in our parishes. So Covenant Eyes does a Safe Haven Sunday. We did it here in the Diocese of Orlando. It is a Sunday that is selected and where it's addressed one Sunday during the year, addressing pornography. I've been invited to parishes to talk about the issue because pornography has been called the #1 fueling factor to driving the demand to human trafficking. Our youth are watching it. It's creating future buyers, not in all cases, but in some cases it can change the brain, your addictions, your brain composition, where it's like driving that demand side where you're becoming addicted to pornography, and then it's not enough anymore. And that's when people start seeking out victims of or prostitutes, which we know 75 to 80% are actually human trafficking victims. So that's just another way to look at the demand side, is by addressing pornography in our parishes. All right, well, we are just out of time. Oh,
I know
yes.
we're out of time, but I think it's not just pornography. We start talking about social issues from the pulpit. I don't hear a lot of that, and I think it's very important to talk about child abuse, domestic violence. What else are we talking about from, the pulpit, from church leadership? Who is driving these conversations? I think that's very important. I'm sorry. Continue.
Yeah, no, those are all root causes of human trafficking, right? And I'm sorry we did not get to Jean's question, who was asking about immigration in relation to human trafficking victims. If there's any questions that you did not get answered, I know we didn't get all to them, but I will be sending out my email address in the follow-up email with our recording. And I just want to take, if everyone can just take 30 seconds and just leave one last thought with our audience. We'll go ahead and start with Katie.
I continue to believe that we are a community of people. We aren't just individuals, and that as a community, we are responsible to each other and for each other, and that if you do see something, that you do make that action. If there's imminent danger, call 911. If you think there's not imminent danger, then call the human trafficking hotline. But really and truly, if you see something, say something. Find somebody to help.
Thank you. Sister Marlene?
I think daily we have to remind ourselves of what is the resolution that I need to make today to make life better for someone else, and apply it to situations of abuse and trafficking, slavery, and find even in one day what you can do to make a choice for something that makes someone else's life better that day.
Thank you so much. And Joe?
Last thing I'd say is kind of responds also to many of the questions that were asked and also were in the chat that we didn't get to. And that's a lot of questions leading to why isn't the church doing more and what can we do? And my first response to that is we are the church too. Okay. So what are you doing? The Alliance is part of the church. Most people here on this call are part of the church. So we're doing it. Every place is different too. My diocese is very active in anti-human trafficking work and has done a lot to raise awareness and other activities over the last year. Some dioceses maybe not, but then find out what's appropriate to where you are. What are the law enforcement doing or not doing? There's always could be somebody who's involved, whether it's a nonprofit or the police, the church, parts of the church, whatever. There's also advocacy that people, I don't think we talked about that too much, but that's an aspect of how you can get involved at the local, state, national level. So the answers to those questions are not going to be the same for everybody. I think that's the last thing I would mean. Just find out what's appropriate for where you are and what you can impact.
Thank you so much, Joe. And thank you to all of our panelists today. I did put the number for the National Human Trafficking Hotline as well as our website. So if you are looking for more information about this issue and ways you can get involved, check out our website. If you're looking how to recognize the signs of human trafficking, once again, check out our website, or you can also go to our YouTube channel. I did want to leave one last thought because I saw that we have some high schools on here, high school teachers, and we are launching our What Would You Do video contest for high school students where they can learn more about this issue and help educate other students. That will be posted on our website shortly within the next few weeks, in the next couple of weeks. So take a look for that or email me directly. I'd be happy to send you some more information. With that said, I think this is a great opportunity also to get high school students involved and really learn more about this issue because it's so important. And we also do high school presentations, by the way. Well, thank you all very much today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you all for attending and all the great questions. Thank you for understanding that we did not have enough time to address them all, but if you'd like to message me or directly email me with those questions, we will do the best to get those answers to you. And we are getting lots of hearts and thumbs up. So everyone, have a great day and go forth and make a difference in the world.
Thank you.